Welcome to Patients at Risk, a discussion of the dangers that patients face when physicians are replaced with non-physician practitioners. I'm your host and the co-author of the book Patients at Risk, The Rise of the Nurse Practitioner and Physician Assistant in Healthcare, Dr. Rebekah Bernard. And today I have a special guest host joining me, Dr. Amy Townsend. She is a fellow board member with me for Physicians for Patient Protection. Many of our critics of our organization accuse us of exaggerating the risks that patients face when physicians are replaced by lesser trained practitioners of the healthcare team. We're often told that we're engaging in a turf war with nurse practitioners and physician assistants, and that we should support these non-physicians practicing to the, quote, full extent of their licensure and training. And today we're going to explain why we take such a hardline stance against the independent practice by non-physician practitioners. It's not because of a turf war. It's because of patients like 7-year-old Betty Wattenberger. And she died when a nurse practitioner failed to diagnose her properly with pneumonia and sepsis. And Betty's father, Jeremy, is gracious enough to join us today to make sure that other parents don't lose their child because a physician was replaced by a non-physician practitioner. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Jeremy, I've seen a lot of photographs and videos of Betty, and she just looked to be so full of life and vitality. Can you tell us about her?
Yeah, Betty, the reason I'm wearing my shirt today, my Wonder Woman shirt, is because we used to call her Wonder Betty. Because she was making amazing progress and strides, even though she was autistic and she was starting to become verbal, and we were starting to see things in her that we were told were never to be expected. She started riding her bicycle, and she started running, and she started interacting with other children, and she was learning how to read, and she was doing all those things before her life was cut short. So Betty was life, and she was happiness. That's why I'm actually in her room right now. You can see behind me, there's bright colors. That's because that's who Betty was. That her favorite thing was greens and reds, and her whole room is painted in greens and reds because she was vibrant and full of life and energy. And that was Betty in a nutshell. She didn't have a lot of those breakdown moments. She didn't really have that comprehension. She was hey, I'm easy go, whatever. And that's kind of the way she was, and that's the way she approached life. And I think all of us need to have a little Betty in us at some point.
I think so. And really, just from that little bit that I could see in the photos and the videos, you could just see that she just glowed with life. And really, other than, she did have her challenges with health as far as the autism, but she wasn't an unhealthy child, I don't think, right?
No, we even had a $10,000 donation given to us to have a genetic testing ran on her and on her DNA after she passed away. And there was no genetic conditions or anything like that identified within that genetic testing.
So she was in really, generally good health until one Sunday when she developed a fever. And first she was getting better, it sounded like, but then she quickly took a turn for the worse. So you guys decided to take her over to a local urgent care. And can you tell us a little bit about what happened then?
Yeah, we had contacted her pediatrician first, and he didn't take appointments on Wednesday, suggested we went to go to pediatric urgent care. So after speaking with her pediatrician, we took pediatric urgent care, thinking like most people do in the state of Texas, that a pediatric urgent care is going to be similar to an ER. It's going to have the same capabilities. And this one, in fact, actually did advertise that they did have the same capabilities as an urgent emergency room, and had all the facilities and everything capable of diagnosing and taking care of her. So we were under the impression when we went there, we were seeing someone who was number one, a doctor, or, on that level, and someone who would actually be able to treat, diagnose, and, give us a proper assessment of Betty and what's going on. Because when you are talking about a child that is autistic and nonverbal, you take a special level of care whenever you're dealing with that patient.
Jeremy thought that he was seeing a physician. He actually wasn't. It was a nurse practitioner that was giving the care to Betty, and that wasn't something you were aware of, right, Jeremy?
No, it wasn't something we were aware of. In this case, the APN did not identify herself as an APN. She did not wear a name tag or a badge or any other type of identification, you're assuming at that point, having no medical background or experience and never being in this situation before, that you're going to be seeing a doctor because you're at an urgent care situation. Urgent care is always painted as the next step before an ER or similar to an ER. So you're thinking you're seeing at least a doctor at that point.
Right. And then just to kind of fill in the rest of the story before I have Amy kind of talk a little bit more, I want to get her impressions of what happened as a physician. But
Sure.
what happened was you took Betty in. She gets evaluated by a pediatric nurse practitioner. The nurse practitioner evaluates her, says she just seems like she has maybe a viral infection, recommends that she take some Motrin, and sends her home. No x-rays, no blood tests, no real evaluation. And so you guys take her home because this is what the
Yep.
quote doctor told you to do. And then she didn't seem very well. And then the next morning, she took a serious turn for the worse. Is that correct?
Well, that night, what really threw us off was that Betty was going through the last times of her life, and she seemed to be improving overnight, and then rapidly took a very sharp decline the next morning. And we're like, the nurse had just told us that she just had flu, her lungs were clear, everything was fine, and with the flu, you do have exhaustion, sometimes diarrhea from taking in a lot of liquid, things like that. So we thought at that point, hey, we've already seen a doctor, she's already made an assessment, and we know what's going on with her, and we had no reason to be concerned at that point.
Right. But then unfortunately, the next morning, you found her unresponsive. Blood was coming from her mouth. You rushed her to the emergency room, but it was too late. She passed away shortly after.
Yeah, that's correct.
Now, you reached out to Amy Townsend because how did you find out about Amy? You just saw some reports about what we were doing to advocate for patients?
Yeah, I did that, and I also did some additional research, trying to get some additional help here in the state of Texas. The state of Texas itself has not been very cooperative into looking into this, and we've had a lot of struggles with it. So I was trying to find as many resources as possible to be able to kind of push back and actually get this taken seriously in the state of Texas.
Right. So I'm going to ask Amy just to share a little bit about what she knows about the story and what happened next. And you can kind of jump in with some of the details. Go ahead, Amy.
So I don't know if you remember this, but it was almost exactly a year ago today that you actually contacted me, and he reached out to me through LinkedIn. And so what I remember of that situation was that he had actually read a story, Rebecca, that you had posted or published in MedPage Today about my struggles with a nurse practitioner here in my area and trying to get the Texas Nursing Board to pay attention and on this nurse practitioner that was actually causing significant harm in my area.
Now, one of the things that's really interesting, and Amy, I'd like your perspective on this, is that Betty's mom took a photograph of Betty while she was actually there in the urgent care. Amy, tell us what you see in that photograph of Betty and what you as a physician may have been worried about if you had been evaluating a child like this.
Yeah. So, the first time that I actually saw that photograph was when Jeremy had reached out to me for the very first time, again, through LinkedIn. And he had actually already, published some of the information on a website called the Sepsis Alliance. And so he was able to forward me that story, and it included the picture that they, took at the urgent care. In that picture, her lips are a very dusky color. Her cheeks and eyes looked very sunk in. She looked like she was probably, somewhat dehydrated. And then Jeremy also, after I spoke with him, after, communicating with him on LinkedIn, he actually was able to send me some of her medical records from the clinic itself at the time that she was seen. And the one thing in those records that really stuck out to me were her vital signs. Her vital signs, it was very apparent that the child was unstable. She had a heart rate, so I think it was in the 160s or 170s. And those sets of vital signs in combination with that picture, I don't see how any practitioner could have not recognized how ill Betty actually was, and the appropriate thing would have been to send her directly to the emergency room.
Right. I mean, it's okay as a nurse practitioner or a primary care physician to maybe not know necessarily what is causing a person to not look well. But what we're all supposed to know how to do at a minimum is to recognize when someone is severely ill and needs a higher level of care. In fact, that's what we hear all the time about, nurse practitioners. They know when to refer to another level and that we're supposed to trust them because they know their scope. But this is an example where certainly she did not recognize. And Jeremy, I think I saw in the records that you or her mom actually asked the nurse practitioner or someone there, well, don't you think she looks unwell? Why is she breathing so fast, right?
And just to add to what Amy was saying also, actually we discovered later on that there actually is an internal policy for vital signs inside of that clinic, which was not followed. So it clearly states that a first set of vital signs, full vital signs, including respiratory rate, which was not taken, needed to be taken. If those signs were outside the norm, like she was tachycardia, then they should have taken a second set of vitals, which they did not do. So there's a second violation on that policy. And then the third violation on the policy says that if the patient's vital signs, I've got it here in front of me, the patient's vital signs are not where they're supposed to be at, abnormal vital signs will be documented in a medical record and reported to a physician and medical provider in a timely manner. Intervention should be administered and documented. Reassessment of the abnormal vital signs. A patient is not to be discharged from the facility with abnormal vital signs unless approved by a physician or medical provider. She clearly violated their own internal policies, not once, not twice, but 3 times. If she had followed the vital signs policy accordingly and done the assessments accordingly, we might not be in this situation right now.
Amy, talk a little bit about that, about why we have policies and procedures, and especially when it comes to non-physician practitioners and how important it is that we follow those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because there is limitations on the scope of training for non-physician practitioners. Their training is much shorter than a physician, and they can be very helpful to help physicians kind of, to extend the reach of the care that we can provide. But because of their limited training, protocols are often put into place like this to make sure that, sick patients and most certainly sick children are recognized and the appropriate interventions are implemented.
We know I'm a family physician, so is Amy. We do take care of children. We're not pediatricians, but we are trained to take care of children. And one thing in my training was a very healthy respect for how quickly children can decline. Now, in the case of Betty, she passed away about 15 hours after that urgent care evaluation, which is so fast. And from looking at the photographs and from hearing some of the history and the vital signs, it sounded like she was very unstable. But Jeremy, you as a parent, you have no way of knowing that. You did everything right. You took her to not only an urgent care, but a pediatric urgent care where you expected that someone would be there that would know what they were doing. And in Texas, nurse practitioners are required to be supervised by a physician. However, it didn't seem like there was any physician. There was no physician available at the time that Betty was evaluated. And in fact, we don't even see any evidence that the nurse practitioner asked any advice or reached out for help in this case.
That's correct. The physician was in Cambodia at the time. He stated that he assigned a proxy, one Dr. Sherry Burke. And when I investigated Dr. Sherry Burke was in a delinquent non-payment status on her medical license. She was not eligible to be supervising anyone at the time. So if that was the proxy and that was the case, then the nurse practitioner should not even have been on that site because she was practicing medicine without a license. And so was Dr. Sherry Burke, who's now under investigation from the Texas Medical Board.
I mean, did they say was the kind of substitute supervising physician, was she even aware that she was responsible at the time?
So the medical board, whenever I talked to them about Dr. Cowan, they believed that Dr. Cowan was doing the right thing and had assigned an appropriate proxy. But they did not do any further investigation into that proxy. I had to go do that piece myself. And so the Texas Medical Board now is kind of in a situation where, do you call the doctor who was in Cambodia a liar, or do you, take his word that Sherry Burke, was his proxy at the time? So if you look at Sherry Burke's current licensure, it's still active, but she has no address. There's no demographic, there's no information whatsoever on her license. It's just completely blank. It says NA on everything. No practice, no nothing. So I don't even know what she's doing right now.
So regardless of whether there should have been a supervising physician, there's no indication though that the nurse practitioner even made an attempt to reach out to anyone with any concerns or questions or following the protocol that you mentioned.
No, there's no signs of that. She seemed like she was doing her own thing that day. Even to go further, there's actually a procedure for documenting medical records. She violated that procedure also, that policy on site also. And that was one of the things the initial Board of Nursing investigation hit her on, is that her charting could have caused patient harm. So they even identified at the nursing board in the first investigation that she was acting reckless by not charting properly. So, I mean, it's been shown over and over. She clearly violated policies, procedures. She was doing her own thing that day. She was in charge, and that was all there was to it. She wasn't going to reach out to anyone.
Well, part of the problem with this remote supervision that we have is that we have to trust the person that's being supervised, that they're going to know that something's outside of their scope, or they're going to recognize that something is wrong and reach out for help. And I think this is one of the fatal flaws that we have for supervision. Amy, you are a Texas physician. You, of course, broke the big story about Kevin Morgan and his inappropriate testosterone clinics, and went through a tremendous amount of effort to get him to stop that behavior. What are your thoughts when it comes to Texas and supervision of non-physician practitioners?
So this is one of the most frustrating things, is that, over the last couple of decades, we have had this gradual deterioration of the definition in the laws that are there about what actually, physician supervision means. And so, as nurse practitioners have pushed for legislation to gain more and more independence, what has happened is, medicine and physicians have ultimately conceded little by little to where now that, what we have as a definition for physician supervision is very lax. And unfortunately, when we get to situations like this, it's very hard to hold anyone accountable just due to the vagueness of what, physician supervision actually is. And I think that Jeremy has, run into that, as he's tried to get some accountability for this case.
Yeah, that is such an important element of this. I mean, of course, we have this terrible tragedy that should never have happened. And now we have a grieving parent that's saying, like, wait a minute, this should never have happened, and this should never happen again to another parent. So, Jeremy, you really single-handedly are just starting to rattle cages and shake on these legislators, these politicians, these people that are supposedly making sure that patients are being kept safe. And it seems to me like you're just hitting challenge after challenge after challenge. And I just want to thank you for what you're doing. Can you tell us a little bit about, first of all, were you aware right away? Of course you were aware something went wrong because you lost your daughter, but were you aware of all of the issues with nurse practitioners and that sort of thing when this happened?
No, I wasn't aware of it at all. It never came to my mind that, you would have a nurse in charge of an urgent care or anything like that. I mean, she's the owner of the urgent care, so she does have some responsibility in determining who actually is supervising her and who has licensure there.
Wait, you're saying that the nurse practitioner owns this pediatric urgent care?
Yes, currently she is the majority owner, and when Betty was saw, she was a minority owner with Dr. Cowan of this urgent care. She is now the majority owner of this urgent care with her father, Frank Shear. So
that's part of the problem with the current laws that we have in Texas, is there is this conflict of interest there. How do you essentially, have someone on the payroll that is responsible for also supervising your work? To me, that is almost impossible for them to actually do real supervision when they're receiving, a check from, or their salary is dependent on, how they supervise.
That's been a question I've raised with legislators too, is that how can you expect a a doctor to delegate licensure and authority to a nurse when the nurse is the owner of the clinic, or at least part owner, as it was in Betty's case. She was part owner of the clinic at the time. So it's almost a peer relationship when it's not really supposed to be.
That is just amazing to me. I can't even fathom that. I don't know what the laws are, and I guess I should know what they are in Florida. Of course, it's state to state as far as whether non-physicians can own clinics. Apparently in Texas you can, probably in a lot of other states, and I'm sure in the full practice authority states they can. Of course, Texas is supposed to be a supervised practice state. So you began to learn about this, and then you started talking to, who did you go to first? The nursing board?
Yeah, my first trip was to Health and Human Services here in Texas, because I didn't realize they weren't a medical facility here in the state of Texas. And I actually got involved with what I called Washington, D.C., called Health and Human Services there, because I couldn't get anyone in the state of Texas to answer. I had an ombudsman assigned to me initially to investigate. He was shocked that it wasn't a actual licensed medical facility in the state of Texas, and they rejected my complaint as a facility complaint. They said, no, we can't do anything with it. So I had to try to find the next avenue, which they said file a consumer complaint, because they're not a medical facility. So I filed a consumer complaint, which was then denied and told that this is a medical issue, it's not a consumer issue. And they denied it and sent it back to me. The Attorney General's office did. And then that's when I finally, started going to the nursing board and saying, look, I'm going to file this complaint. I filed the complaint 3 times. I was denied all of the times, every single time initially. So I got a hold of Senator Pat Fallon's office at the time, and Patricia Vojak. She got involved, and she told me to submit my nursing board complaint and let her know, that I had submitted it. And she told me how to submit it in a certain manner and way. And it was like mojo magic. All of a sudden, nursing board's doing their first investigation at that point.
That's amazing to me. So here you are, a parent that's lost a child. Clearly there were things done wrong. You're just trying to get an investigation really to protect other people, because at this point, this isn't really for you, it's for other families. And you got nowhere until you involved an actual political representative. That's amazing. Amy, does that sound like normal to you for what you experienced with the Texas Board of Nursing?
Yeah, I ran into a lot of the same hurdles. Even as a physician, it was very difficult to find the right avenues of exactly where to send the complaint. And even if the complaint happened to end up in the wrong person's hands, there was no assistance in redirecting, hey, this is where you need to go. It was really just trial and error and, trying over and over and over again. And again, I think that it sounds like Jeremy ran into a lot of the same issues. One of the things that I was so incredibly impressed that by the time Jeremy reached out to me, he had already gone through a lot of these things and had already talked to Governor Abbott's office and to other representatives, as well as his state senator. And so, I was really impressed that someone who did not have any medical background was able to, accomplish as much as he did in that period of time.
It just amazes me that anyone would have to go through these kind of lengths just to report a concern. And that's just shocking to me. First of all, I know it's probably not for Amy because she's gone through these lengths to try to stop a different nurse practitioner who was doing things wrong over and over again. But so what's also really interesting about this is when the Board of Nursing finally did agree to review it, they found really their only complaint was just that the nurse practitioner did not adequately take vital signs. So really, it sounds like they didn't have any concerns about her practice or a failure to identify a seriously ill child, but just simply that she didn't notate full vital signs. Is that right, Jeremy?
Yeah, that was initially what they stated on their board orders, is that, her improper charting could have caused patient harm, things like that. Subsequently, I filed appeal after appeal after appeal, all of them being denied until I got a hold of the governor's office. And when I got a hold of the governor's office, Scott Kibbe there put me in touch with Dusty Johnson, who's the general counsel at the nursing board. And then that was October of last year. And he had to agree that the nursing board investigation was not sufficient. And they reopened the nursing board investigation. And it's still ongoing at this time. And they have a criminal justice investigator now working through that at the Board of Nursing.
Amy, if a physician was found to be, or someone reported to the Board of Medicine that a physician may have contributed to the death of a child, how do you think the medical board would handle it there in Texas as compared to the way the nursing board has, just hypothetically?
Yeah, I mean, the big issue here is what is the standard of care for that profession? And essentially what we have right now are nurse practitioners are practicing medicine, yet they're held, they're responsible to the nursing board, not the medical board. So they're not held to a medical standard of care. What they're going to look at, in these situations is, did they do the nursing tasks that they were, that they should have done? Not looking at medical judgment or, again, what medical standard of care is in these situations. And so that's what makes it very difficult to hold people accountable in these situations. You have nurses that are practicing medicine, but only held accountable to nursing standards.
And patients have no idea. Jeremy had no idea. Parents like him, patients like him, every day receive care from non-physician practitioners, assuming that they're the person on duty. And in many cases, you have to see the physician and you're told, no, the NP or the PA is just as good. They can see you quicker. They're the only ones that are here. You're probably paying the exact same as you would pay for a physician. And meanwhile, potentially you're getting the wrong diagnosis, the wrong treatment. And if something does go wrong, that there's no accountability. Does that sound right in your experience, Jeremy?
Yeah, that's correct. And, that's kind of been my experience, even talking to other, I have a 12-year-old daughter, and we still run into the same issues when we go to, medical facilities or anything like that. Even primary care, they want to send you to a nurse practitioner first. They're like, well, we've got 5 nurse practitioners and 1 doctor, and that 1 doctor only no, I still want to see the doctor.
Yeah. And why wouldn't you? I mean, it's clearly there's a difference. There's a difference in training, and there's, as you've now experienced, there's a difference in accountability, and it really is mind-boggling. And we're going to get into, we're going to have a second segment. We're going to come back and we're going to talk more about the additional efforts that you're making to make changes to protect patient safety, actually looking at legislative change, looking at more, rather than just waiting for the Board of Nursing to take action, because clearly they're probably not going to do that or take adequate action. So we're going to get into that in our next segment. So I'd like to tell all of our listeners out there, if you're interested in learning more about this topic, please get our book. It's called Patients at Risk: The Rise of the Nurse Practitioner and Physician Assistant in Healthcare. It's available at Amazon.com and at Barnes & Noble. Please subscribe to our podcast and our YouTube channel. It's called Patients at Risk. And if you're a physician, we'd love for you to join our group. It's called Physicians for Patient Protection. Our website is physiciansforpatientprotection.org. Join us back for our second episode of this important discussion with Jeremy Wattenbarger.